Welcome back to the second part of this two-part lecture series on The Rape of the Lock by Alexander Pope. We left off last time thinking about the way that Alexander Pope tries to have his cake and eat it, the way that he both satirizes the customs and manners and lifestyle of the upper class while also praising and glorifying them. We did that by looking at his portrait of Belinda at the beginning of Canto 2, lines 1 to 18. Now we're going to move on to a different critical question of how does juxtaposition work in this poem? Because this is something that Pope is doing constantly. He's juxtaposition, taking two things that are unlike in some way and putting them together to sort of illuminate each other, or two things that seem similar and putting them together to make you realize how unlike they are. And at the beginning of Canto 3, we can see the use to which he puts juxtaposition when he really wants to be satirical. I asked whether he was satirical with respect to Belinda, but in this beginning of Canto 3, he turns his critical eye on English society in general, and here you can see him really, what he can do when he really wants to turn the knife. Twist the knife, I mean. Let's take a look at this. Going back to our old favorite for out-of-copyright poetry, it's the poetryfoundation.org website. We use this for Milton, and we're going to use it now for The Rape of the Lock. Beginning in Canto 3, once again, we have Pope sort of zooming out to look at the scenery as a whole before he zooms into the very small events that this heroic comical poem describes. And it begins, "Close by those meads," that's short for meadows, "forever crowned with flowers, where Thames with pride surveys his rising towers, there stands a structure of majestic frame, which from the neighboring Hampton takes its name." So far, so good. Setting the scene, Hampton Court Palace. Something that would have been as familiar to British readers in the 18th century as the White House or nowadays, what's it called, Mar-a-Lago or whatever. "Here Britain's statesmen oft the fall foredoom of foreign tyrants and of nymphs at home." Wait a second. Britain's statements foredoom the fall, a little bit of poetic inversion there, of foreign tyrants and of nymphs at home. Now, obviously, he's using the word fall in two different senses. So this is a good example of what the in classical rhetoric is called zeugma, where you have one word used in two different ways with one subject governing two different predicates, and so on and so forth. A figure of speech in which a word applies to two others in different senses. For example, John and his license expired last week. So the fall of a nymph obviously refers to the fall of her sexual virtue, whereas the fall of a foreign tyrant is, Saddam's statue, like toppling over. "Here thou, great Anna," and the Queen of England at the time, "whom 3 realms obey, dost sometimes counsel take, and sometimes tay," which would have rhymed with obey in the 18th century. And we have a double zeugma super special here, first on foredoom, and second on take. The statesmen's foredoom foreign tyrants and nymphs, and Anne takes counsel, and also tea. Obviously the word take being used in two different ways. And zeugma here illustrates, I think, his use of the zeugma is a special case, an especially strong instance of one of the governing literary techniques that he uses throughout this poem, which is juxtaposition, taking two unlike things and putting them next to each other for a humorous effect, a comical effect, a satirical effect. Let's read on. "Hither the heroes and the nymphs resort to taste awhile the pleasures of a court." Hither meaning to there, to that palace. "In various talk, the instructive hours they passed. Who gave the ball, or paid the visit last? Now he gets a little description of social life and gossip at court. One speaks the glory of the British Queen, and one describes a charming Indian screen. A third interprets motions, looks, and eyes. At every word, a reputation dies. Love that couplet right there. That's so much social life, scheming, courtly life is summed up in these two lines. He's a writer of extraordinary economy, and he uses the rhythm of the heroic couplet, that 1-2 punch, to for its capacity to sort of also bring about these juxtapositions in a kind of with a kind of punchline type effect. Snuff or the fan supply each pause of chat, while singing, laughing, with singing, laughing, ogling, and all that. So, a description of the court, right? But now, a shift in scenery from Alexander Pope, from the narrator of this poem. Meanwhile, declining from the noon of day, and now having set the place, right, Hampton Court, where all this happens, he's going to set the time. Declining from the noon of day, the sun obliquely shoots his burning ray. The hungry judges soon the sentence sign, and wretches hang that jurymen may dine. Wow, a lot of satire happening in two lines there. It's getting to be the late afternoon, and we get an image of this is the time when judges will rush through their work and hang a wretch, a poor man, a miserable man, more quickly in order that men who work in the law and jurymen may dine. That's Pope being satirical right there. That's him criticizing not just folly, but vice. The merchant from the exchange returns in peace, and the long labors of the toilet cease. The toilet meaning doing your face, your hair, your makeup, etc. Belinda now, whom thirst of fame invites, burns to encounter two adventurous knights, at amber singly to decide their doom, and swells her breast with conquests yet to come. So we get this image of what time it is and what's going on out in the world. There's merchants, there's judges, and there's also Belinda ceasing from her labor of the toilet. I know it's a funny expression, but toilet would the first thing that they would have thought of in the 18th century would have not been number one and number two, and it would have been your hair, your makeup. As I discussed last week, there's a whole genre of representative art, a woman at her toilet, which basically shows a woman at a vanity desk with a mirror doing her makeup, fixing her hair, etc. So we get this juxtaposition again now between Belinda, a lady, doing her makeup and her hair and all of that, but one whom is filled with the thirst of fame. And I'm reminded of talk about apposition, the last line of Beowulf, with the very last thing that was said of him, there was never anyone so eager for fame. So there's a kind of juxtaposition between the scope of the world in which this woman moves and the nature of her ambition, and the way that ambition is turned toward what? Socializing, playing cards, flirting, having fun with her friends. One of the questions about this poem is the degree to which it's misogynistic. I mean, obviously it can be read as misogynistic. You can always read things towards the good or towards the bad. Belinda is in some way, she's sprightly, she's unfixed. We can read her as somebody who's deeply superficial, as we'll see in a bit. But there's also a kind of judgment, I think, especially coming from Alexander. Well, there's a kind of judgment on that is going to be more and more prominent in the 18th century on a society that restricts the scopes of ambition for women and of women of society to the trivial. There's a sense in which if Belinda is entirely mired in the trivial, the small, the everyday, the meaningless, she doesn't have much options. She's not offered many choices. this is something that Mary Wollstonecraft will complain against. She will complain about how women are educated and how women are basically like constrained by their educations to be superficial. Mary Wollstonecraft, of course, being the great first wave feminist writer of the Enlightenment of the late 18th century, and somebody who I believe is in. I can't remember whether she's in this. No, I think she may be under Romanticism. I'm not sure, but they should have her in your Norton anthology. In any case, those are just my musings on Belinda. But I invite you to think about themselves. One of the discussion questions for this week is this a poem that takes women seriously? One of the ways in which it does take women seriously is that if the stakes of conflict are low, the passion which Belinda and the people around her feels is not. They are people who take themselves seriously. And there's a sense in which I think, maybe I'm wrong about this, but there's a sense in which Pope doesn't trivialize that in the way that, if you read like YA fiction or something like that, you can look at the kind of love triangles or whatever that so-and-so character is involved in and roll your eyes. But it's one thing not to take the situation seriously, but it's another thing not to take the person seriously. I don't know. These are just some things to think about. I think there's different ways to argue this. Another thing you can ask is, to what extent is this poem allegorical or symbolic? In what way is it a poem about sexual virtue and the way that a young woman especially, needs to conduct herself sexually in society in an appropriate way? In what way is it, like Bain, also commenting on Ovid and the whole tradition of, the script that requires that a man pursue and a woman resist, that she reject but not give offense, as Pope puts it, and the absurd situations in which that puts people. I will leave off with just a juxtaposition of two sort of passages in this sense. One is Belinda's Lament in Canto 4, line 147. This is where her piece of hair has been cut off, and in that wonderfully poetic description of Umbriel descending to the cave of spleen to bring back all her tears and sighs and bad humors and migraines, and the gnome addresses the power of spleen down in the deep depths of her psyche and says, "Hail, wayward queen, who rule the sex to 50 from 15, parent of vapors and of female wit, who give the hysteric or poetic fit, on various tempers act by various ways, make some take physics, others scribble plays." I think it's interesting that he compares the female temperament to the poetic one. Do with that what you will. But Thalestris urges her to be angry, like she's all like from 89 on. You gonna put up with this? How are you gonna defend your fame, etc.? And then at line 147, Belinda, again parodying the conventions of epic, gives a speech about "Forever cursed be this detested day, which snatched my best, my favourite curl away. Happy, 10 times happy had I been if Hampton Court these eyes had never seen. Yet," line 151 if you want to look on, "yet am I not the first mistaken maid by love of courts to numerous ills betrayed. Oh, had I rather unadmired remained in some lone isle or distant northern land, where the gilt chariot never marks the way, where none learn ombre," that's the game they're playing, "none ever taste bohea," that's the tea they like to drink, "there kept my charms concealed from mortal eye, like roses that in deserts bloom and die." The rolling, beautiful, epic cadences of his poetry, again, and the heroic tenor once again is juxtaposed with card playing and tea. And of course we can also juxtapose the tremendous violence of the emotion, the greatness of the feeling with what's actually happening. Shortly before I taught this class in this fall, I had newly encountered the slang term, because middle-aged men is where slang terms go to die, extra. And I asked the class whether Belinda was being extra in this poem, and they seemed convinced that pretty much everyone in the poem, maybe with the exception of Sir Plume, is being extra. Anyway, she gives this speech and this lament, this lamentation, and then we move to Canto 5. And Canto 5 begins with one of her friends, the grave Clarissa, as she's described in line 7. And Clarissa is, if you'll pardon me, going to explain it all. Was it Clarissa? Anyway, line 9. She's going to say, oh, you shouldn't worry about it so much, Belinda. You're putting too much importance in this. Why are beauties praised and honored most? She asks at line 9 and following. The wise man's passion and the vain man's toast. Why, decked with all that land and sea afford, why angels called and angel-like adored? Why round our coaches crowd the white-gloved beaux, that is, the young men? Why bows the side box from its inmost rows? What a perfect line. How vain are all these glories, all our pains, unless good sense preserve what beauty gains. Good sense, huh? That men may say, when we the front box grace, behold, the first in virtue, as in face. Oh, if to dance all night and dress all day charmed the smallpox or chased old age away, who would not scorn what housewives' cares produce? Or who would learn one earthly thing of use? One earthly thing of use. So Clarissa is basically saying, like, we're going to die, we're all going to get sick, there's smallpox, there's hard things in the world. Who cares about beauty? Who cares about vanity? Vanity literally means in Latin emptiness, right? She says if learning to be beautiful could scare away disease or death, then everybody would do it all the time. To patch, nay, ogle might become a saint, nor could it sure be such a sin to paint. But that's not the case. 25. But since, alas, frail beauty must decay, curled or uncurled, since locks will turn to gray, since painted or not painted, all shall fade, and she who scorns a man must die a maid. Little echo of Herrick there, yeah, and the whole Carpe Diem thing. What then remains but well our power to use, and keep good humor still, whatever we lose. Keep good humor, yeah? And trust me, dear, good humor can prevail when airs and flights and screams and scolding fail. Beauties in vain their pretty eyes may roll, charms strike the sight, but merit wins the soul. So Clarissa making an argument for good virtue, character, personality, having a sense of humor, not taking yourself too seriously, as opposed to being simply fixated on physical beauty. Seems sensible enough. So spoke the dame, but no applause ensued. Belinda frowed, Thalestris called her prude. To arms, the fierce virago cries, and swift as lightning to the combat flies. All side in parties, and begin the attack. Fans clap, silks rustle, and tough whalebones crack. Whalebones were, of course, used to structure the large, elaborate dresses that they wore at the time. So, a moment of comedy here. Here's this sensible young woman, Clarissa, saying, oh, you see, you got a piece of your hair cut off. It's no biggie. Chill out. Like, let's all be calm. Everybody just looks at her like, what? And then they all go at it. I think this is a very funny moment. I wonder the extent to which Clarissa is supposed to be mouthing something important, whether the sort of moral of the story is couched in her words, or another option is this. Clarissa is jealous of Belinda and always has been, and now's her chance to sort of like give her a talking to, and like, you know, that does she really hold with that what she's saying, or are all these sort of moralisms that she's sharing things which are part of a traditional moralistic literature going back to time immemorial, if she's just quoting them just to sort of like get at Belinda? That's a possible option as well. Especially, I love grave Clarissa graceful waved her fan. Silence ensued, and thus the nymph began. Is she just having a moment? I don't know. Anyway, there's a big fight. It's very funny. Belinda, the wily virgin, throws a charge of snuff into, which is powdered tobacco, in his face and overdubs him, shouts at him to restore the lock, but there is no lock to be restored. The poet argues, as I've said before, that it has been taken up and made a star in the sky. A sudden star, it shot through liquid air and drew behind a radiant trail of hair. Playing again with sort of Ovid's metamorphoses of one thing being transformed into another, and the whole sort of epic mythological trope of somebody being turned into a constellation or a star, like Orion the Hunter or Cassiopeia or something like that. And the poet calls on her at the end, "Cease, bright nymph, to mourn thy ravished hair, which adds new glory to the shining sphere. Not all the tresses that fair head can boast shall draw such envy as the lock you lost. For after all the murders of your eyes, one after millions slain, yourself shall die. When those fair suns shall set, as set they must, and all those tresses shall be laid in dust, this lock the muse shall consecrate to fame, and midst the stars inscribe Belinda's name." And this is, once again, the trope of the poet. We see it in Dante, you know, we see it in Shakespeare, "So long lives this, and this gives life to thee." The idea of poetry, of art bestowing immortal life on its subject. Is he making fun of himself in doing this? Because do you think he imagined that people would be reading this in literature classes in 250 years? Maybe not. I don't think he would have imagined that people would be studying English literature in college in 200 years. After all, in his day, you went to university to read Greek and Latin. Reading English literature was just something an educated person did for their fun and their leisure. Anyway, yeah, I think I'm going to leave off there, but there's one more thing I want to talk about. And in sort of capping up, what I'm going to put that in a different video.